Hey, Car Wizard, we got a new car for you to work on.
A new car to work on?
Yeah, Lincoln MKZ. They say it makes a noise when they go over bumps.
A front end noise?
Something like that, clunking.
Well, we need to get to the bottom of it and find out what's wrong with this thing. Let's get right on it.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Wizard Shop, guys. Today we have a vehicle that's been dropped off that has some front end issues. It's got some clunking noises. This is a 2012 Lincoln MKZ with the 3.5. It's also very similar to a Mercury Milan or a Ford Fusion, basically the same chassis or body. But today I'm going to show you guys some tips that you can do at home that you can kind of isolate what's going on. How do you find front end noises? They really agitate or annoy people when they have clunking noises up front and they just don't have any idea. How could I find out what it is without spending money? And there's some tips that I'm going to show you to help you isolate it. You may not be able to replace it. You'll have an idea of what's wrong going into getting it repaired. So the noise that's causing this customer such annoyance, what could be the problem? Could it be number one, the sway bar links? Are they loose and clunking under the front end? Could it be number two, the brake calipers and the guide pins are loose and the calipers are actually flopping around and making a bunch of clunking noise? Or could it be number three, the actual struts? Could the struts be causing this noise and really annoying the customer? I'll let you guys have a few seconds to make your decision and see what you think it is. And then I'm going to show you some tips to find out what is the noise that's causing this annoyance. So now you guys had a few seconds to make your decision what you think's wrong with this car. I'm going to show you some steps that you can do at home to isolate it and get down to the bottom of it. Okay, one of the things that you can do right in your driveway without even putting on jack stands or lifting it or anything is open your door. And you say, well, what good does that do? How am I going to find out my clunking front end, what's going on there by opening my door? Well, what you do is you use the door as leverage, just like this. Now, I've done this in the past. I've showed you guys this trick and people say, oh, good job, Wizard, you're going to rip their door hinges off. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're not putting our whole weight on it. We're not going to get the car rocking like it's in a Category 5 hurricane. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is gently rocking the car so that you can see if there's any play in any of the suspension components. If you were to rock it so hard like that, you actually wouldn't even be able to find what's wrong. It would be so forceful. So we're going to lightly rock this. I'm going to have Michael demonstrate what you can do through the wheel well right there. While you have a buddy rocking the car, you put your arm through the wheel well and place it on the strut, the springs, or anything that you can grab and hold it. And while someone gently rocks the car, you can feel with your hand, is there clunking up high, down low? You can even put your hand on the sway bar link while someone gently rocks the car again. And it will soon reveal itself when you put your hand on it. And you can physically feel it clunk, 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 clunk. You can say, aha, I found it. There it is. So what do you feel down there, Michael?
I'm feeling something coming from the strut, Wizard.
The actual strut itself?
The strut itself.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put this thing on the lift and show you guys another tip. Let's get it on the lift. And if you're working in a car and you really lose your patience, sometimes I do, I take my Wizard staff and I total the car. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But we are going to use this Wizard staff today, or a steel bar, to further check the front end. You don't want to use a wooden one, it'll break. You don't want to use a broom handle, it will. I've tried it before, they break. You need a nice solid steel bar. Slide it underneath about a quarter of the way, and then you can lift. We can hear that clunk noise. You guys hear that? Let's try the other side. Now, you don't have to have a lift to do this. You can put the front end up on jack stands or a jack. Just make sure, like you see here, it's just about that far off the ground so you can slide a bar. You don't want the bottom of the tire this far off the ground. It's not going to work. And when we're checking this, we're not putting so much uplift on it that we're going to pull the car off the jack stands. And make sure you're not using the Harbor Freight double recalled jack stands. We don't want nobody getting hurt. Let's go ahead and do this side and see what we find. You can hear the clunk again. Now it's time to lift the car even higher in the air, or if you have it on jack stands, put it up a little higher so you can crawl underneath. And we're going to start inspecting some components by hand. We're going to take a look. Now we're not going to do a full vehicle inspection today. We're working with the front end and trying to find the clunk, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And we'll talk a little bit about the car after that. But we know we do hear a clunk when we use the steel rod, the wizard staff. We hear something clunking. And Michael said during our first test, he felt that it was coming from the strut. But let's just go ahead and isolate the rest of the things. Let me show you things that you can check by hand if you have it a little higher up in the air. So the first thing that I listed of the possibilities was the sway bar links. Let's test those. Let me show you how you test those and what they look like. See this skinny little metal rod here, and it's got like a little ball joint. It looks like a ball joint here, or a tie rod end. It looks like one. It's not a tie rod end. It has one up top, one at the bottom, and there's a skinny rod. And all this does is connect the sway bar right here to the strut. These frequently go bad on multiple makes of cars. And the way you test them is you grab the sway bar, like I've done here, and you pull it up and down. And a bad one will just very easily go clunk, 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 and it'll be very evident. But these ones are nice and tight. Let's check the other side. Again, here's our sway bar link. They call it a link, like I said, because it links the sway bar to the strut. So let's try and pull on this one. Nothing. Nice and tight. So we checked the sway bar links, and they're like brand new. They're very strong, very tight. So that possibility is not the problem. It's not the sway bar links. The second possibility that I mentioned was the brake calipers or the brackets might be loose and rattling upon hitting bumps. Let's take a look at those. So the brake caliper mounts to the front suspension with this bracket right here. You see this bracket. And it's got guide pins, what I'm touching right here, that slide in and out. It's just a pin, that's all it is. I'm going to wiggle it, and you can kind of see. You can hear a little clunk, but that amount of play is normal. We actually have a vehicle in the shop right now that we have, and it's so bad. The customer didn't want to fix it, it was too expensive, but it was just like clunk, clunk, I mean, it was rattling really bad, and that was their problem. But this is normal here, this isn't the problem. Let's take a look at the other side. Again, that's normal play. So the second possibility that I gave was the brake calipers, the guide pins and the bracket could be loose and the brake calipers are flopping around. As you've seen, that turned out not to be the issue. So the third option that we talked about, the possibility that could be the culprit here, is the struts themselves. And we really didn't think that it would be that, and especially after we further inspected it and talked with the customer. There was a comment that he said, I just had those replaced. Those are fairly new in there. Let's take a look at them and let's show you what they look like. As you can see, the strut says quick strut. This was a replacement assembly that came with the spring and the strut and everything is one assembly. And it looks like it has been fairly recently replaced. Look inside the cup that holds the spring and you can see a fair amount of rust. Really bad rust actually. So there's not really a lot you can do with the struts to test them other than some of the first two options we showed with test. But visual inspection is one thing you can check. Is there oil coming down the side of the struts? Because there's oil inside of them. It uses the oil as like a fluid to dampen the blow of hitting bumps. These are dry. They look like they've been recently replaced, except for the rust around the bottom of the cup that holds the spring. When I seen that rust, I knew that they weren't put on 4 weeks ago. These were put on probably over a year ago. So that has given quite a bit of time for there to be issue with these struts. I run into this issue a lot when I'm looking at cars where somebody says, I just had that replaced. And in my mind, I say, I don't care. I really don't care that you just replaced that because it still could be bad. And most of the time when people recollect back on the history of their car, What they think it was 2 months ago usually turns out to be 2 years ago. When they get their receipts out and they look and they go, oh, yeah, it was a lot longer than I thought it was. It's actually 2 years ago. These struts were installed by a different shop. Where, I don't know. I actually told the customer, you should take this back to that shop and claim warranty on them. It would save a lot of money and it would solve the issue. The customer didn't feel comfortable with that shop's abilities, and they said, I just want you, Wizard, to fix this, just replace them and be done with it. This case isn't warranty that I have to cover, but there are instances where I do have to cover warranty for customers.
Hey, that sounds like my friend's Honda Element.
Yeah, we put new brake pads on and there was a defect in the pads that was making them rattle really bad. And finally we got it back in and we tried a different set of pads and some different hardware and it solved it. I didn't charge her anything because it was a factory defect, so I covered the warranty on that and kept a happy customer. Like I said, we didn't do these struts, so there's no warranty here for the customer. But we are going to be putting new struts on, a higher level, a higher quality one, so that this doesn't happen again. 6 months, a year and a half, I don't know how long these struts have been on there, but they have failed. It's the strut bearings, they've actually collapsed and the thing just clunks and rattles really bad over bumps. By the time we take all that apart, the labor involved to get to the bearings, it was the same price just to take the struts off and toss them. That happens a lot. They actually sell these kits with the spring and everything combined together as one unit because so many mechanics buy them. Why dinker around with a strut and taking it apart for the same price? You take the old one off, throw the new one on, out the door, on to the next job. Let's lower this car, look inside the engine bay. I'll show you another way you can tell if struts have been replaced recently. So as you can see, here's the top portion of the struts where they mount in the strut towers. It's got shiny new bolts, shiny new nuts, and the sticker. In the test that we showed, the first test where we pulled the door open and rocked the car, you can also have a buddy put his hand like this over the strut where it mounts. And you can feel clunking going on right here on these. This is where we kind of decided what was the problem here. It's inside of here. The strut's bad. But as you can see, they have been replaced. They're still bad. Before we close this out, I have this engine in front of me. I have this car in the shop, and I wanted to give you guys another Wizard tip. These cars, the 3.5 Fords, whether in the Fusion, the Edge, the Lincoln MKZ, I don't care what car it's in. I've ran across this a few times where the water pump's leaking, and it will leak right behind the alternator. There's a tiny little hole in the block. You'll see coolant coming out in that area, and you'll say, I must have a coolant hose leak. I've had this over and over. I got a coolant leak, Wizard, what is it? And when I see that coming out of the little weep hole, I know the water pump is bad. Let me show you something about the water pump on this engine. The water pump on these engines is driven by the timing chain. It is fully enclosed by the timing cover. And on some vehicles, it is an engine out job. This one actually can be done with the engine in place. 3 or 4 times this has happened that the water pump is leaking. And when I give the customer the quote, they just about jump through the roof. They're like, you're kidding me. For a water pump? I'm like, no. And I go through the whole rigmarole over again. I show them the book time. I show them procedures, how much work you have to do to get down to the water pump. And the response I got every single time was, stop where you're at. I'm trading this car in. There's no way in hell I'm paying that for a water pump. That happens every time. Let me show you why. Here I have printed off the book time to do the water pump on this job. As you can see, it's listed the factory time as if back in the day when it was still under warranty, this is what it would pay. This vehicle is no longer under factory warranty, so we move over to the standard time, which is what I would charge, over 14 hours. That 14 hours of labor does not include the water pump or the parts. And here's the thing, I'm going to have to pull your timing chains off to get to your water pump. I'm not going to put the old ones back on. Because they have timing chains on any make and model of car have been known to have trouble with guides or tensioners, things that fail. And it would be really bad if you paid that much money to have the water pump replaced and you didn't do the chains and the guides and everything else. 3 or 4 months later, the timing chains fail, a tensioner fails, and there's that elusive question again. Why didn't we address this when it was apart? And the answer always is because they didn't want to spend the money. If I'm going to do this job, you're going to get a water pump, timing chains, guides, tensioner, $2-3 grand, depending on what we find when we get in there. It's a huge job. That's half the cost of this whole car. And most people start thinking about that and they're like, $2 to $3 grand is a wonderful down payment on a new car. They say, take your hands off, Wizard. We're done with this car. Park it outside.
So, Car Wizard, when did they start putting water pumps attached to the timing chain? That didn't used to be the way back in the day.
No, it didn't, but there's several makes and models out there that do that now. It's because they decide that there's a certain life of the engine, 100, 150,000 miles. You should be buying a new car. Stop trying to make this one live. You should buy a new car. That's the idea behind the car makers, the automakers. They don't want you to keep tearing this apart and fixing it. So they don't care if it costs you money. And they don't care how long it takes to do the job. They're likely not going to do the job. The warranty will be expired by the time it goes bad, and now it's on you. I just wanted to show you guys that about this engine. I've seen several of these come in, and to me it's a ticking time bomb. Any day now. We're going to see that coolant coming out by the alternator. The coolant leak. $2 to $3 grand.
How long do they have before it actually goes out usually?
Well, what could happen is it'll just continue to leak. You could drive it that way, but eventually your water pump could lock up and really wreck the engine. Throw the timing chain out of whack. Or they could run out of coolant and they keep letting it leak out. They have to keep an eye on the coolant. There is a small time frame there that you could drive it enough to get it traded in or sell it or whatever you want to do with it.
Okay, so if that's the case, Car Wizard, they sell the car, you're at a used car dealership. How do you know you're going to get a good one or not?
That's why you bring a mechanic friend with you to check over the car who's knowledgeable of the common flaws of different makes and models of cars. If I was with a friend and they said, hey, I'm looking at this Lincoln, what do you think? The first thing my eyes are going to do is right down to the alternator. I'm going to look for that coolant leak. If I see coolant coming out, I'm going to say walk away. Don't do it.
Does it start happening after a certain amount of time in driving?
Yeah, you should test drive it and come back and get the engine warmed up to operating temperature so it builds up pressure enough to push coolant out of that little weep hole. But you will likely see evidence that it's been leaking from prior drives where it's going to be wet down the side of the block or coolant stains or dried up crusty coolant. You can also look under the car and see if there's a puddle under the ground and see if you can isolate it down to that area. But like I said, I just wanted to show you that about these engines. We got the struts ordered. We're going to get this taken care of for this customer and get the clunking gone. And get them out the door and another happy customer. That's what I like to have, is every week multiples of happy customers. So I'm glad you guys could follow along and check this car out with me. Showed you a few tips. This is one of those cars that comes into the shop and I know I need to do a video on it for you guys because of the common issues they have, and also I get lots of questions about front end clunks. How do I find the noise? What can I do to isolate the problem? There's so many things that could go wrong. Hopefully these tips can help you out and you can figure it out and either fix it yourself or take it to a mechanic, and you'll know what's wrong with the car. So if they try to say, well, it needs this and this and this and this, you can say, no, I've already checked the car, this is what it needs. And I wanted you guys to be aware of the 3.5 Ford when the water pump goes, that you're in for a world of hurt. So if you're curious what kind of tools I use to work on these cars, check my Amazon affiliates link in the description below. There's all the tools I have listed that I use in the shop. You can purchase them or recommend them to friends. If you haven't hit the subscribe button already, go ahead and do that now. We got many, many more cool videos to come. Thanks for watching.